The 56th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us observe a minute of silent prayer. Amen. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Dilima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 13 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 55th session, Monday, February 12, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we'd like to welcome guests in the gallery, the students from De La Salle, Santiago, Sobel, students and faculty, Mr. De La Cruz, Mr. Villarreal, Mr. De Vera, and Ms. Ubas, and guests of Senator Pacquiao, Dr. Milagro San Juan, of the Quezon City Science High School, retired principal, Dr. Josephine Cruz, the former principal, Rizal High School of Pasig. They are all members of the Philippine Campus Crusade for Christ. Mayor Alice Morales of Malinaw, Albay, Ms. Maria Teresa de los Santos, and Attorney Jeffrey Exiomo from the POEA, and visitors of Senator Subiri, Mayor Hadar Hajiri of Lugos, Sulu Province, Meds Hajiri, Attorney Sibulan, and Nur Jafar Napi. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House informing the Senate that on 7 February 2018, it designated Representatives Umali, Veloso, Revilla, Herrera D., and Garbin Jr. as conferees the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of House Bill number 6573, an act prohibiting hazing and regulating other forms of initiation rights of fraternities, sororities, and other organizations, and providing penalties for violation thereof. Repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 8049, entitled an act regulating hazing and other forms of initiation rights in fraternities, sororities, and other organizations, and providing penalties therefore in anticipation of the approval by the Senate of Senate Bill number 1662.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
Bills on first reading. 1686, an act expediting the titling of lands awarded under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, lifting the restrictions on the utilization of such lands as collateral for securing agricultural loans and other similar financial instruments and for other purposes, by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Agrarian Reform.
1687, an act institutionalizing sustainable coastal tourism, providing mechanisms for its institutionalization, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, by Senator Grace Poe.
Referred to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Tourism, and Finance.
1688, an act prohibiting the establishment of political dynasties, by Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
Senate Bill number 1689, an act imposing tariffs on imported rice, creating the Rice Industry Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, and for other purposes, by Senator Risa Hontiveros.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Ways and Means, and Finance.
The resolutions, proposed Senate Resolution number 621, directing the Senate Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises to conduct an inquiry and aid of legislation on the proposed increase and the contribution rate of Social Security System members, recommending that such increase be held in abeyance until a comprehensive review of Republic Act Number 1161 as amended is conducted, with the end in view of ensuring that the SSS Charter remains responsive to the needs of its members and pensioners, by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises.
622, directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry on the decline in English proficiency of Filipino students in the light of reports of narrowing advantage of Filipino graduates in the global language, with the end in view of assessing present curricula in elementary and high school and encouraging trainings and other learning approaches, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture.
623, urging the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to determine the veracity of persistent allegations that there exists a mafia/syndicate in government rice procurement and importation program and a rice cartel, with an end view of ensuring sufficiency of available staple food, strengthening food security in the country, and putting an end to such illegal or corrupt practices, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food.
624, directing the Senate Committees on Public Services, Public Works, Tourism, and Local Government to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the severe traffic congestion of Metro Cebu and surrounding localities, with the end in view of formulating comprehensive policies to address the deteriorating state of traffic similarly experienced in other areas of the country, by Senator Sonny Angara.
To the Committees on Public Services and Public Works.
625, resolution recognizing and commending the Kasama Ka initiative as a national grassroots-based advocacy program for financial inclusion in every barangay and local government unit, empowering the people through affordable access to inclusive digital finance, by Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of public interest, I move to recognize Senator Manny Pacquiao.
Senator Manny Pacquiao is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madamo gid nga salamat, Mr. President. Si Joanna Daniela Di Mafiles ay taga Iloilo na pinanganak noong June 24, 1988. Si Joanna ay pang-anim na siyam na magkakapatid, puno ng pangarap at pag-asa. Nagsimula siyang magtrabaho bilang OFW sa Kuwait noong 2014. Sa gitna ng pangamba ng kanyang mga magulang at kapatid, ilang beses lamang siyang nakausap ng kanyang pamilya. Noong 2016, nabanggit ni Joanna sa kanyang pamilya ang kanyang plano na umuwi ng Pilipinas ngayong 2018. Huling tawag niya na pala yon sa kanyang pamilya. Noong nakaraang Huwebes, kinumpirma ni Labor Secretary Silvestre Billo III na katawan ni Joanna ang nakita sa isang freezer sa isang apartment sa Kuwait. Mr. President, alam natin kung kailan pinanganak si Joanna, ngunit hindi natin alam kung kailan siya namatay. Nariyan ang posibilidad na mahigit isang taon na mula na siya ay pinaslang. The Philippine Statistics Authority reported that the number of overseas Filipino workers deployed in 2016 was estimated at 2.2 million. Among occupation groups, the largest group is comprised of elementary occupations, followed by those who work as service and sales workers, plant and machine operators and assemblers, and craft and related trades workers. Saudi Arabia continued to be the leading destination of OFWs. About 1 in every 4 OFWs work in this country during the period April to September 2016. The other prepared destinations were United Arab Emirates, Europe, Kuwait, and Qatar. The total remittance sent by OFWs during the period April to September 2016 was estimated at 203 billion pesos. These remittances included cash sent home at 446 billion pesos, cash brought home at 45.7 billion pesos, and remittances in kind at 11.1 billion pesos. Mr. President, napagandang tingnan ng statistics pagdating sa deployment at remittances. Ngunit napakasakit isipin na sa gitna ng mga pangarap at arikain ng ating mga kababayan, maraming OFWs ang nalagay sa panganib at nagsakripisyo ng kanilang buhay. Mr. President, ilang OFW na ba ang nainabuso? Ilang OFW na ba ang ginahasa? Ilang OFW na ba ang nagpakamatay? Ilang OFW na ba ang pinatay? Ilang OFW na ba sa Kuwait at ibang bahagi ng mundo ang nagsakripisyo ng kanilang buhay? Ayon sa DOLE, iniimbestigahan pa rin ang pagkamatay sa Kuwait ng mga OFW na sina Liesel Tros Hudkong, Vanessa Carisha Esguera, Marife Saliling Librada, Arlene Castillo Manzano, Divine Richie Encarnacion, Patrick Sunga, Mira Luna Hontilla. Ang mga kababayan nating ito ay mga household services workers na umalis patungong Kuwait noong 2016, Mr. President. Alam natin na ang sinapit ng ating mga kababayan sa Kuwait ang nag-udyok sa ating Pangulo Rodrigo Duterte upang bigyan ng pagkakataon na makauwi ang ating mga OFWs doon na nais bumalik sa Pilipinas. We are aware that Kuwait is a top destination for OFWs according to the estimates from the Department of Foreign Affairs. There are more than 250,000 Filipinos in Kuwait. Most of them are working as domestic helpers. 3 taon na po simula ng hinikayat ni Secretary Bilyo ang Kuwaiti government na pumirma sa isang Memorandum of Understanding. Ninanais ng MOU na bigyan ng dagdag na proteksyon ang ating mga kababayan sa bansa kung saan pinaslang si Joanna. Hanggang ngayon, Mr. President, hindi pa rin napipirmahan ang dokumentong ito. Mr. President, ilang OFW pa ba ang kailangan maabuso? Ilang OFW pa ba ang kailangan maghahasa? Ilang OFW pa ba ang kailangang magpakamatay? Ilang OFW pa ba ang kailangan mamatay bago tayo umalma bilang isang bansa? Nagtatrabaho bilang katulong ang ating mga kababayan sa Kuwait at ibang bansa, hindi upang abusuhin, gahasain, at patayin. Matagal nang namatay si Joanna Daniela Dimafilis, minamahal na anak nila Tatay Crisanto at Nanay Eva Dimafilis. Ngunit, bago lamang nalaman ng kanyang mga magulang ang kanyang sinapit. Naluigid ko sa pamilya ni Joanna. Kabudlay ang ilang ginaagian subong, Mr. President. Nakakaawa talaga ang sinapit ni Joanna. Napakahirap ng pinagdaanan ng kanyang pamilya. Ang nais lamang nila ay maiuwi sa Pilipinas ang bangkay ng kanilang minamahal na anak upang sila ay makapagluksa at makapagpaalam ng maayos. Napakasakit isipin na may mga kababayan tayo na paulit-ulit na inaabuso, ngunit pinipili pa rin nilang bumalik sa ibang bansa. Pikit mata nilang tinitiis ang hirap upang mabigyan ng ginhawa ang kanilang pamilya. Mr. President, nanginginig ako sa galit. dahil sa pang-abuso sa ating mga OFW. Tama na, Mr. President. Huwag na nating hayaan na magpatuloy ang karumal-dumal na pagtrato sa ating mga OFWs. Let us strongly support the move of the President Rodrigo Roa Duterte and the Department of Labor and Employment in implementing the immediate suspension of the deployment of OFWs to Kuwait. It is high time that we think about how we can truly provide additional protection upon our overseas Filipino workers and offer economic opportunities in their reintegration in the Philippine society. Let me thank this chamber for supporting the passage of Senate Bill number 192, an act mandating the POA to publish, disseminate, and update a handbook on the rights and responsibilities of migrant workers. The approved Senate Bill on OFW handbook is one practical step, Mr. President, but this proactive effort is not enough, Mr. President. According to the published mission, and I quote, POA connects to the world in partnership with all stakeholders, facilitates the generation and preservation of decent jobs for Filipino migrant workers, promotes their protection, and advocates their smooth reintegration into Philippine society, end of quote. Mr. President, we need to review the policies and responsibilities of government agencies like POA and OWA as they heighten the accountability of recruitment agencies in our move to prevent abuses as well as combat illegal recruitment and even human trafficking, Mr. President. We need to know the extent of abuses and what we can do to prevent similar incidents from happening. With this, I filed Senate Resolution number 626, a resolution directing the Senate Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources and Foreign Relations in aid of legislation to conduct an exhaustive investigation regarding the untoward deaths of OFWs and re-examination of the government's labor and foreign policies and programs in light of the continued abuses, exploitation, and deaths of our overseas Filipino workers since the death of Flor Contemplacion on March 17, 1995. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let us look forward to that day when our OFWs would no longer have to be exposed to abuses just to earn money for their families. As we all together work for the socio-economic advancement of our country, let us keep seeking God's wisdom on what we are supposed to do for the holistic welfare of our modern day heroes. Let's remain hopeful that the day will come when we no longer have to export our people as household workers who are treated like slaves. The day when people from all over the world would see and treat the Filipinos with integrity, with dignity, honor, and respect. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Villanueva is recognized.
May I be allowed to ask some clarificatory questions from the gentleman from Sarangani?
Sana honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the onset, may I let me congratulate our distinguished colleague from Sarangani from bringing this up. In fact, before the session started today, this representation and Senator Nancy Binay are talking about filing a resolution tomorrow in aid of legislation to look into this particular matter. And that's why we thank the good gentleman from Sarangani for stating these facts and the importance of really looking into the welfare of our modern day heroes, our OFWs. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, I would like to put on record also that I am in full support of the total ban deployment as of today sa pagpapadala po ng ating mga OFWs doon po sa bansang Kuwait for obvious reasons, Mr. President. Ngunit gusto ko lang pong malaman sa ating colleague from Sarangani kung ano po ang kanyang pananaw tungkol po sa polisiya ng ating pamahalaan when you talk about our labor policy. For example, ito po bang labor export policy ay sinusuportahan natin? Ito po ba ay nararapat o kailangan po talaga more than anything instead na yung labor export policy mas tutukan nating husto yung pong polisiya of labor protection?
Meron po tayong mga policies na existing po, pero sa tingin ko kailangan pa siguro itong dagdagan at suriin mabuti para maproteksyonan pa lalo ang ating mga OFWs na nagtatrabaho sa abroad.
I don't know if my numbers or figures are correct, Mr. President, but there was an article that I read that about 4,000 Filipinos go abroad every single day for greener pastures. And yung problema, Mr. President, may mga lugar, for example, in Kuwait, right now we have 260,000 OFWs. 170,000 of which are household service workers. And for me, tingin ko, Mr. President, ito yung vulnerable sector ng ating mga OFWs, lalo na sa bansang Kuwait. I was told that there's about 10,800 undocumented OFWs in Kuwait. And perhaps itong mga OFWs na ito ay nadali din ng mga illegal recruiters. Mr. President, pwede po bang malaman sa ating colleague kung ano po yung pwede nating maging hakbang? At dahil nakita ko rin po siyang kasama ng ating Pangulo noong Biyernes, baka po pwedeng i-share po sa body ngayon kung ano yung mga hakbang na ginagawa para pagtuunan ng pansin ito pong total deployment ban. Kasi po, yun nga ang sinasabi natin, ano yung alternative po nila ng ating mga kababayan who is just doing everything para magkaroon ng mas magandang buhay at kinabukasan ng kanilang pamilya.
Mr. President, we are going to study that why ang president ang presidente natin nag-issue ng total deployment ban sa Kuwait because he want to make sure na ang ating mga kababayan na nasa ibang bansa ay maproteksyonan hindi lamang sa Kuwait kundi sa iba't ibang bansa at paigtingin lalo na para maproteksyonan sila at bigyan ng chance yung gustong umuwi at mapauwi dito sa Pilipinas. Yun po ang gagawin natin at sa ngayon, pag-iisipan, pag-uusapan kung ano pa yung mga bagay na dapat nating gawin para maproteksyonan talaga ang ating mga modern hero.
Salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo, at tingin po natin napakahalaga na ang mga ahensya ng ating pamahalaan, lalo ng Department of Labor and Employment, Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, maging ang Department of Foreign Affairs, ay ready na sa mga ganitong pangyayari sapagkat napakalaking numero po ang pinag-uusapan natin dito at pamilya ng ating mga modern day heroes. Sa experience ko po, Ginoong Pangulo, noong tayo po ay nasa TESDA pa, pagka po may nire-repatriate at ino-offera natin ng libreng training, scholarship program, unfortunately, Mr. President, 90 to 95% would beg off because most of them wanted to go back and work right away. I think there's also an option in the countries like Oman and Bahrain na kung saan magkakaroon ng World Cup, maraming trabahong naghihintay po doon, baka magandang pagtuunan ng pansin. And I'm glad that the distinguished gentleman from Sarangani wanted to refer his privileged speech in the Committee on Labor and Human Resource Development. The gentleman also mentioned, and I'm winding up, Mr. President. Please, I beg your indulgence. The gentleman mentioned about the memorandum of agreement that the Department of Labor and Employment is talking about para po i-lift yung pong deployment ban sa bansang Kuwait. May I know, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, kung ano po yung nilalaman nitong Memorandum of Understanding na ito. Ito po bang MOU na ito, dahil nare-recall ko po, bago po tayo maging parte ng Senado ng ating bansa, naririnig ko na po itong MOU na ito sa Kuwait. Ito po ba ay kapareho ng MOU na noon pa, noong pong matagal na panahon pa na ipinupush na pirmahan ng bansang Kuwait? Bago po ba ito? At higit sa lahat, gusto nating malaman, Mr. President, ano po ba yung nilalaman nitong MOU na ito?
Mr. President, we don't have a copy right now, but we're going to get the copy of this MOU. And then, mabigyan po namin kayo ng kopya.
And I think the bottom line, Mr. President, is that we should make sure that our OFWs are safe, that they are protected. At kung meron man din pong ibang bansa na nagpapatupad ng gaya ng ginagawa ng Kuwait na hindi protektado, lalong-lalo na po yung ating mga HSW o yung mga household service workers, dapat siguro po ay gawin din po yung ginawa nating desisyon kagaya ng ginawa dito sa bansang Kuwait. Mr. President, hindi na po ako magtatagal pa. Gusto ko lamang pong sabihin for the record na yung latest casualty na si Miss Joanna De Mafelis, unacceptable at talagang nakakagalit po. Yung pong mga binanggit ng ating distinguished colleague, yung pangalang Lizelle Cruz Hukdong, Vanessa Carisha Esguera, Maria Marife Saliling Librada, Arlene Castillo Manzano, Devin Rich Encarnacion, Patrick Sunga, Mira Luna Huntilia. Ilan lamang po sila, Mr. President. Noong 2016, 82 OFWs ang namatay sa Kuwait. Tumaas po ito nitong 2017 ng 103. At kaya po sinusuportahan natin yung move na magkaroon ng total ban hanggat hindi po nasisiguro na mapoprotektahan at tunay na papagseserbisyuhan ang ating mga modern day heroes, ang ating mga OFWs. Marami po salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Thank you very much, distinguished colleague.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the clarificatory questions about this issue about OFWs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that the privilege speech of Senator Pacquiao and the ensuing interpellations be referred to the Committee on Labor, Employment, Human Resources Development, and the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Is there any objection? There being none, the privilege speech of Senator Pacquiao is referred to the Committee on Labor and Foreign Relations.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, PS Resolution 560, under Committee Report 234.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
I move to consider PS Resolution 560 under Committee Report 234.
Said resolution is now for consideration.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Resolution directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an immediate inquiry and aid of legislation into the status of the programs of the Philippine Coconut Authority consistent with the pursuit of the sustainable development of the coconut industry by finalizing the Coconut Farmers Registry and Industry Roadmap with the intention of promoting the coconut industry and increasing the income of the coconut farmers to bring them out of poverty.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Senator Cynthia Villar, be recognized.
Senator Cynthia Villar is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Esteemed colleagues, I stand here today to sponsor proposed Senate Resolution number 560, or the resolution directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an immediate inquiry in aid of legislation into the status of the programs of the Philippine Coconut Authority consistent with the pursuit of the sustainable development of the coconut industry by finalizing the Coconut Farmers Registry and Industry Roadmap with the intention of promoting the coconut industry and increasing the income of the coconut farmers to bring them out of poverty under Committee Report number 234, prepared and submitted by the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food. The coconut industry is a major contributor to the economy, accounting for 1.14% of the gross national product. Such contribution is due to the fact that nearly 30% of the country's arable land, or about 3.5 million hectares, are planted with coconut trees. This represents 69 of the 81 provinces. The top 3 coconut-producing regions, namely Davao Region, Region 11, Northern Mindanao Region, Region 10, Zamboanga Peninsula, Region 9, and Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, ARM, and Calabar Zone, Region 4A. Except for the Davao Region and Calabar Zone, the top 3 coconut-producing regions have very high level of poverty incidence as compared to the national average of 21.6%. ARM with 53.7%, Northern Mindanao with 36.6%, and Zamboanga Peninsula with 33.7%. The Philippines has the lowest yield in coconut production among the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, with only 4.4 metric tons as compared to the 9.6 metric tons of Vietnam, 5 metric tons of Thailand, and 6.5 metric tons of Indonesia. The coconut industry has been a continuous decline in farm productivity over the years, with an average productivity of 45 nuts per year from the ideal 150 nuts per year per tree. This situation is attributed to the poor genetics of the Philippine coconut trees, a large part of which are senile, and most are not intercrop. Such decline is also due to the nutrient-deficient trees, inadequate infrastructure, and minimal research and development. The proposed resolution sees the need to provide for the development of the coconut industry as it has the highest potential for growth through productivity enhancement, diversification, among others. A diverse range of products can be made out of coconuts, such as coconut oil, desiccated coconut, coconut water, virgin coconut, cocoa sugar, coconut net, and many others. A robust and sustained increase in export would spur economic growth, create employment, and draw the coconut farmers into the social and economic mainstream. Ultimately, it has the biggest potential of reducing rural poverty. Crop farmers comprise 8 million of our population, 3.5 million of whom are rice farmers, and 3.5 million are coconut farmers. Together, they represent 90% of the farmers in the country. So if we can solve poverty among them, then we would have solved the bulk of poverty in the country. To fully realize such potential, the resolution highlights several issues that should be addressed as follows. Poly issues like infrastructure connectivity, the quality of extension services, the dynamism of research and development, and the soundness of resource allocation of government to the sector. The role of the Philippine Coconut Authority should be specific and vital in the development of the coconut industry, taking into account the huge impact it has to the country's international trade and poverty reduction goal. The PCA should have a strengthened, vibrant, and vital eyes and heart for the development of the industry. The old and antiquated low-input coconut farming technology it is practicing should be changed, as it might not be sustainable to carry the industry to the next years of the ASEAN integration. If the government desires high growth in agriculture and job creation, it should look at the coconut lands as a major vehicle, and it should provide support and presence of an industry development plan which should be clear and endorsed by the industry players and stakeholders. It cannot be overemphasized that there is an urgent need for the Philippine Coconut Authority, non-government organizations, and other stakeholders to support the development of the coconut industries and assist the coconut farmers by focusing on increasing their income. We have identified some measures that will contribute to targeted goals. On increasing the income of coconut farmers, we are encouraging farmers and farm owners to establish farm schools that will promote the propagation of hybrid coconut seedlings that can produce 150 nuts as per tree per year, as well as provide extension services, trainings, or education to coconut farmer on the cultivation, harvesting, processing, and marketing of coconut trees, its fruits, products, and byproducts. The PCA and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority will be in charge of such. In terms of financial support, the provision of funds shall be done through the appropriation budget for the PCA in the General Appropriations Act and the use of income of the COCO Levy Fund. In addition to the corporate income of the PCA, we will pursue the appropriation of funds for the PCA in the GAA. To achieve this, an amendment to the Cocoa Farmers and Industry Fund Bill, or Senate Bill 1233, will be proposed, which will provide a new section that will state mandated appropriations in the GAA for the programs and activities of the Philippine Coconut Authority. Meanwhile, the rehabilitation of the cocoa oil mills may be funded by either budget and placed with the PCA or through the proceeds of the privatization of some of the oil mills. In the first scenario, we will work for the allocation of a certain amount in the PCA budget that will be used for a one-time rehabilitation of the oil mills. Thereafter, the oil mills are expected to sustain their operation and earn profitably. In the second scenario, we may allow some of the oil mills to be sold and or privatized, the proceeds of which shall be used to rehabilitate the remaining oil mills. The remaining oil mills that need to be rehabilitated will be identified based on their usefulness and contribution to the needs of the coconut farmers. Having said all that, the committee recommends the following. As cited earlier, the government, particularly the PCA, should focus on increasing the income of coconut farmers. To achieve this, the PCA and other government agencies and private stakeholders should aim to increase productivity, among others, promoting hybrid coconut seedlings, and encourage product diversification, such as in the production of cocoa water, cocoa sugar, cocoa coir, and cocoa peat. Intercropping of crops in coconut farmlands should also be promoted, such as coffee, cacao, cassava, banana, and other suitable agricultural crops. The establishment of farm schools should be encouraged by the Department of the Agriculture and the PCA and should be supported by TESDA. To support the objectives of items 1 and 2, the Senate of the Philippines and the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food in particular shall ensure the provision of funds through the annual GAA and the use of the income of the proposed Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund. Inclusion of a new section in Senate Bill number 1233, which will state mandated appropriations in the GAA for the programs and activities of the PCA to ensure yearly appropriations in the GAA. The 100% allocation of the mandated appropriation will be broken down as follows: infrastructure program, 20%, planting and replanting, 20%, intercropping, 20%, shared facilities, 10%, research and development, 10%, fertilization, 5%, new products and marketing, 5%, and overhead, 10%. Another amendment will also be proposed in the COCO levy bill to earmark the annual income of the COCO levy trust fund. The yearly income of the COCO levy trust fund will be proposed to be utilized as follows: shared facilities program, 35%, health assistance and scholarship program, 15%, empowerment of coconut farmer organizational cooperatives, 15%, credit through land bank and DBP, 20%, farm improvements to encourage self-sufficiency, 15%. Projects and activities relating to shared facilities and farm improvements will be implemented in support of community development and encourage community-managed enterprises such as community nurseries and fertilizer production. Regarding the investment of the trust fund, I have manifested my preference for it to be invested in government securities to ensure the safety of the fund and for assured returns. As cited earlier, the yearly income of the COCO levy trust fund will be proposed to be utilized according to cited programs percentage earlier. To ensure the safety of the trust fund and for assured return, it should only be invested in government securities. Mr. Chairman, from day one, since I chaired the Senate Committee of Agriculture and Food, I have repeatedly emphasized that among the farmers group and among the agricultural industry, coconut farmers and the coconut industry respectively need the most support and assistance because they are the poorest and have the biggest number, second to rice farmers. And ang ating mga coconut farmers ay ang pinakamahirap sa lahat ng mga magsasaka. In fact, based sa report ng NAPSI, or National Anti-Poverty Commission, among rural poor, coconut farmers have the highest poverty incidence at 60%. Coconut farmers' per capita income is 41 pesos a day, and 1.8 million of the 3.5 million of the 3 million CCT beneficiaries are from the coconut producing towns. It takes around 6,300 pesos a month to feed a family of 5 in our country. That is just for food. It does not include provision for education, health, and other needs of a family. Ang isang coconut farmer earns only 1,500 pesos a month. So it's ironical that a person planting the crops which are feeding our country ay walang sapat na kakayahan or income to feed his own family. I really think there is something terribly wrong in that scenario. Ang mga nagpapakain sa atin ay walang maipakain sa kanilang sarili at kanilang pamilya. Moreover, coconut is one of the most important crops in the country. We are the second largest coconut producer in the world, accounting for nearly 30% of global production. The coconut sector is among the top 5 net foreign exchange earner, an average of $1.5 billion annually in the last 5 years. Based on those figures alone, malinaw na marami ang ating mga kababayan na nakadepende sa coconut industry. Kaya mula noon, hindi nawala ang focus ko sa pagresolve sa decade-old issues surrounding the COCO levy fund and adversely affecting the living situation of coconut farmers as well as the sustained growth of the industry. Sila ang siguro namin na makikinabang sa aming proposed Senate resolution under Committee Report number 234. Hangad ko at ng aking committee na sa mga susunod na taon ay mawala na sa listahan na mga grupo ng tao or sector na may pinakamataas na casualty incidents ang mga coconut farmers. Ilang dekada na silang napako sa sitwasyon na iyon, tapusin na natin ang kanilang kahirapan. With that, Mr. President, I seek the urgent approval of Committee Report number 234. Marami pong salamat at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat.
Majority Leader. Mr. President, to give time to the other senators to study the resolution, I move to suspend consideration of PS Resolution 560 under Committee Report 234.
Is there any objection? There being none, the consideration of this resolution is suspended.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of the following resolutions. Resolution 613 under Committee Report 235, Resolution 615 under Committee Report 237, Resolution 617 under Committee Report 239.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is in order.
Thank you. Mr. President, these are the resolutions concurring in the ratification of the agreement for the avoidance on double taxation between the Republic of the Philippines and the government of Mexican states, the Kingdom of Thailand, and Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, respectively, Mr. President. The parliamentary status of the measures is that we are now in the period of interpellation. So I move that the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Loren Legarda, be recognized.
The sponsor of the resolution is recognized. Senator Loren Legarda is recognized.
May we recognize now the Minority Leader for very few questions, Mr. President.
To interpolate on the said resolutions, the Minority Leader is recognized.
Wait na, babaan niyo ako.
Will the lady sponsor, the Honorable Senator Legarda, yield the floor to just one question?
If you don't mind, Mr. President, the Minority Leader, through the President, I move for a 1-minute suspension.
Session
There
is
is a
suspended.
liquidity problem of the sponsor, Mr. President.
Session is suspended for a minute.
Walang hiya mo to.
among all of you. Yeah, sige. Okay. Lagi niya ako niloloko, kaya mga biro.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
The minority leader is making side comments that I dare not mention on the floor, Mr. President. May we now recognize the minority leader and the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations.
The minority leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, the majority leader was saying that the liquidity problem took a little time to resolve. Will the sponsor yield to just one question, not related to the liquidity problem? No, Mr. President, in the past treaties that we have concurred in its ratification, we have included a paragraph which will basically require the concurrence of the Senate in the withdrawal from the treaty because the concurrence of the Senate is required in the accession to the treaty. It is, so there is a Senate participation in the accession. It is only logical that, and reasonable that the Senate concurrence is also secured in case of renewal. And the good gentle lady from Antique has graciously agreed to all these amendments in the past. Just one question, Mr. President, we will support this treaty. Will the gentle lady again, as in the past, accept an amendment which will basically require the concurrence of the Senate if the President wants to withdraw from the treaty that is now under consideration?
Of course, Mr. President, I think it's a very enlightened intervention made by the minority leader. We agreed in the past treaties to include it, and we will be more than happy to, of course, be consistent and include it. And in fact, are you referring to resolve finally that the President of the Philippines may, with the concurrence of 2/3 of all the members of the Senate, withdraw from the convention, or agreement, as the case may be, subject to study? Is that was your previous intervention, which I accepted? Are you proposing that?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
At the
President.
appropriate time, either we can propose it, or if it's acceptable to
We
the
can do it
sponsor
now and then
already,
pass it on the second reading.
After we close the period of interpellation, it can be a
I see.
committee
Okay,
amendment,
I'm
and we'll have no
mag-interpolate.
objection, and we can pass it.
Yun na yun. Yes, Mr. President, we agree.
In that case, Mr. President, there are no other interpellators. I move to close the period of interpellation for PS Resolution 613, 615, and 617.
Yes. Before that, Majority Leader, may the presiding officer just ask one question to the sponsor? I'm just looking at the title of the three measures that we are passing, and it talks about two things. One with regard to double taxation, and the others with regard to prevention of fiscal evasion. What part of the treaty talks about, and what is the gist of the issue of prevention of fiscal evasion?
What part of the treaty talks about fiscal evasion?
Yes.
1 minute suspension.
Yes, thank you. Session is suspended for a minute.
No, just cite to me the part. No, show me the part. Article. Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
It's 5, right? 5 to 16. Mr. President, it's Articles 5 to 16 which actually refers to the portion on fiscal evasion.
Yes. What is the gist of this? How does it work?
On which of the three treaties is this? In the treaties, Articles 5, I don't think I have to read into the record, but Article 5 to 16 of the treaties, Mr. President, would refer to the provision on fiscal evasion, which in very broad terms would just provide the mechanisms so that the inflow of foreign direct investments may be monitored in the spirit of transparency.
Foreign investments or income? In effect, this is only for foreign nationals, no? Is this correct?
Between the countries, yes, yes. It addresses the exchange of information between the countries, only for foreign nationals, right? For both.
Exchange of information.
Exchange of information between the contracting states, between the countries, with regards to
nationals earning income in that particular
earning income in the
that
respective
particular
countries. Correct? Yeah. So the taxes pertaining to the national working in that country. Yes.
So operationally, let's say for example, if the income tax in the Philippines were, let's say, 30%, and the income tax in a foreign country, let's say in Mexico, is 25%,
Yes. So there will be.
and if he paid 30% here,
Totalization.
he does not need to pay 25% there.
Yes, so that there's the that's the point, the avoidance of double taxation.
Correct.
Because if there's 25, 30, so ma-minus na yun.
Correct.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
if, for example, the tax rate in Mexico is 35, and the tax rate here is 30, he still has to pay 5% in Mexico.
Yes, Mr. President.
And that would be deducted here.
That will be deducted here.
Is that
Because
correct?
30% yung sa
Local,
Pilipinas,
yes.
then he would just have to pay 5% in Mexico.
In Mexico.
Yes, Mr.
And there will be an exchange of information with regard to that.
Yes.
That's how it will operate.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
have no
you.
further questions. Majority Leader?
Senator Lacson wishes, no, I shouldn't say that. It will prolong the discussion. Never mind. Ganun ba yung nangyari?
Again, Mr. President, the motion is to terminate the period of interpellations for all PS resolutions.
There is a motion to terminate the period of interpellations. Are there any objections? The chair hears, the minority leader is recognized.
Well, with your permission, Mr. President, I'd like to take the floor again because of something that was brought to my attention by my staff just now. I understand, Mr. President, that there was a case decided in February of 2014 by the Supreme Court. This is the case of Dicini versus Secretary of Justice. And the issue was the
Makinig lang kayo.
constitutionality of Section 5 of the Cybercrime Cybercrime Prevention Act, Section 12 of the Cybercrime Prevention Act, and Section 19 of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. These three provisions were declared as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Now, we note that these three sections are found in the Cybercrime Convention or the Budapest Convention that we are now ratifying.
Mr.
Mr. President,
Pardon me.
We are dealing with the double taxation.
At this
I'm
point in
sorry.
time, yes.
I'm sorry.
I will answer that, Mr. President,
Apo, Fred.
when we deal with the
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr.
cybercrime
Perez. Okay.
treaty.
I withdraw the question.
Thank you very
Yes.
much, Minority
you.
Leader. The presiding officer asked the plenary if there are any objections to the motion of the Majority Leader. There being none, the period of interpolations is hereby closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, period of amendments is now open.
We recognize the sponsor, Senator Loren Legarda, Mr. President.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized.
What is this? There's an omnibus committee amendment that the word democratic be inserted in all the full titles of the agreement in PS Resolution 617, Committee Report 239 to read as follows. Convention between the Government of the Republic of the
I beg your
Philippines.
pardon, Mr. President. May we know first if there are any committee amendments in the body before
Yes,
we go
Mr.
to
President.
the title?
I'm manifesting the sole committee amendment
Yes.
for the
this is
inclusion
the-
of the word democratic. And so it should read Convention between the Government of the Republic of the
Yes,
Philippines.
but that is the title, Mr. President. The standard procedure is to go to the amendments of the body first before we go to the title.
Yes, Mr. President, this is the omnibus amendment for both the title and the body, that the word
No, no.
democratic be placed before the Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Because it only had Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, so both for the title and the body.
Let's go to the body first, Mr. President. So what line, may we know what line the distinguished lady is amending, Mr. President?
Just for the information, the title is also contained in the body. So,
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
so lahat
Ngayon, meron. So,
ito yung second whereas.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
After conferring with the sponsor, Mr. President, we found out that these are individual amendments. So I move to close the period of committee amendments. It's not contained in the committee report, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I now move to open the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we now recognize Senator Loren Legarda for the individual amendments?
Senator Legarda is recognized for individual
On the
amendments.
second, thank you, Mr. President. On the second whereas clause, please include democratic before socialist. So it will read Convention between the Government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Government of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka and so on. That's on the second whereas clause.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, motion is approved.
And in the wherefore portion on page 2, the same thing.
Is there
Convention-
any objection?
Yes.
There being none, motions approved.
When we proceed, then we proceed now with the title after
Mr. President,
after
there is an individual amendment
of Senator Drilon. Yes.
of Senator Drilon before we go to the title, Mr. President.
Minority leaders recognized for individual amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we propose the following as an omnibus amendment to the bill, to the resolutions now on the floor. Resolved finally that the President of the Philippines, may, with the concurrence of 2/3 of all the members of the Senate, withdraw from the agreement or convention, as the case may be, depending on whether or not it is an agreement or a convention, as an omnibus amendment.
What does the sponsor say?
Yes, accept, Mr. President.
Sponsors accepted. No objections. There being none, motions approved.
We now continue with the title, Mr. President.
Yes. May we also include the word democratic before Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka for the title?
Is there any objection? There being none, motions approved. Majority Leader.
That is for PS Resolution 613, Mr. President.
That is correct. 617.
Huh?
617.
617? There are no amendments for 613 and 615.
The Minority Leader made an omnibus amendment
For
earlier.
all three.
Yes.
And may we know from the
accept
sponsor if there are any other individual amendments for 613 and 615?
No other amendments, Mr. President.
Therefore, I move to close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, motions approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading PS Resolution 613, subject to style.
Is there any objection? There being none, motions approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Resolution 615 under Committee Report 237, subject to style.
Is there any objection? There being none, motions approved.
I move to approve on second reading Senate Resolution 617 under Committee Report 239, subject to style.
Is there any objection? There being none, motions approved.
Move to suspend consideration of PS Resolutions 613, 615, and 617, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motions approved.
Mr. President, may we recognize Senator Subiri for a manifestation?
Senator Sabiri is recognized for a manifestation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much to the Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, today is a great day for justice. We received, through the office of Senator Lacson, the good chairman of the Committee on Public Order and Security, received a letter notice from the Supreme Court that those mentioned, the lawyers mentioned in the possible or the cover-up of the Acho Castillo hazing case that were mentioned repeatedly in Facebook posts and social media are now undergoing investigation by the Supreme Court on disbarment proceedings, utilizing the committee report that we approved last week, Mr. President. So I'd like to congratulate the Supreme Court for their swift action. As soon as they received the committee report of Senator Lacson and the committee, they took cognizance and immediately approved the resolution for the investigation on the disbarment of these individuals, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, again, I would like to thank the Supreme Court for their swift action, and you know, the law profession once again had shined in this moment. It was at that moment when we were investigating, we were very frustrated with lawyers. But we can see that, with all due respect to my ninong, Senator Gordon, but now we could see, because of the swift action of the Supreme Court, that justice is slowly grinding and moving forward, Mr. President, in our country. Thank you. And we already informed the family. And when I called Mini Castillo, the mother of Acho, coincidentally, they're in his grave today in Manila Memorial, giving flowers to the son. So she burst into tears, thanking all of us in the Senate, especially the committee, for the committee report that had come out. And she's very appreciative.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President. Again, thank you to the Supreme Court.
Manifestation is noted.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you. We thank the gentleman for the information. I now move to resume consideration of PS Resolution 614 under Committee Report 236.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
This is the resolution concurring in the ratification of the agreement establishing ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic Research Office, or the AMRO. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpellation, Mr. President. So I move to recognize the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Loren Legarda.
Senator Laurel Legarda is recognized.
There are no interpellators. Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we now recognize the minority leader for my individual amendment?
Minority Leader is recognized.
Of course, the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations is on the floor, Mr. President. That's postponed.
Yes, Mr. President. Ready to receive the amendment of
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the chamber, may we propose the following amendment to be inserted in the appropriate portion of the resolution. Resolved finally that the President of the Philippines may, with the concurrence of 2/3 of all the members of all the members of the Senate, withdraw from the agreement.
Yes, Mr. President, we accept.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading proposed Senate Resolution 614, the resolution concurring in the ratification of the agreement establishing ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic Research Office, AMRO.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, motion is approved.
Move to suspend consideration of PS Resolution 614, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of PS Resolution 616 under Committee Report 238.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
This is the resolution concurring in the accession to the Convention on Cybercrime. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation, Mr. President. I move to recognize the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Loren Legarda.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
Can I ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended for a minute.
Suspend muna.
Yeah, may I move for 1 minute suspension?
Ready to resume, Mr. President. Yes.
Session is resumed.
Move to recognize the minority leader for the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Minority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the lady sponsor, the Honorable Senator Lorel Regarda, yield the floor to a few questions?
Yes, Mr. President.
Is the good sponsor aware of the decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Dicini versus Secretary of Justice, decided on February 11, 2014?
Yes, Mr. President. If the good minority leader is referring to the provisions of the cybercrime law, which
Yes.
deemed unconstitutional certain
Yes.
provisions of the law.
Yes, in that case, Mr. President, the Supreme Court declared as unconstitutional several provisions of the Cybercrime Prevention Act, particularly Section 5 with respect to Sections 4C4, 4C, Sections, etc.
4C3.
Yeah. 4C3, 4A2. Now, it also
4C3 and 12 and 19, Mr. President.
Section 12 was also declared unconstitutional. Section 19 was also declared unconstitutional. We note, Mr. President, that the cybercrime prevention, these particular provisions of the Cybercrime Prevention Law or Act was based on the on this treaty, the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. These provisions were declared unconstitutional, and presumably the conclusion is the provisions of the Cybercrime Convention on Cybercrime would also be considered as unenforceable in our jurisdiction if we base if we look at the ruling of the Supreme Court. Having said that, what will be the situation today once we have ratified this, since the provisions from which Sections 5, Section 12, Section 13 of the Cybercrime Act, which are based on the Budapest Convention, are declared unconstitutional?
Mr. President, even if the three provisions mentioned under the cybercrime law were rendered or declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, we are still compliant with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, and after a careful and thorough reading of RA number 10175, the cybercrime law, it will show that its provisions are in substantial compliance with the provisions of the convention, even without the three provisions of the cybercrime law. So in short, even absent the three unconstitutional provisions, it still provides for, first, the criminalization of conducts amounting to cybercrime; second, procedural tools that would assist in investigations; and third, mechanisms for fast and rapid international cooperation. In addition, the convention allows any state party to avail itself of the reservation provided under Article 14, Paragraph 3 of the convention, which pertains to real-time collection of traffic data. In short, the cybercrime law can stand even without the three unconstitutional provisions and is compliant with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime.
Thank you, Mr. President. At least it's on record, and we can read it again, so that the rationale for ratifying this convention, even in the face of the Supreme Court decision, would at least guide us in enforcing this or complying with the Budapest Convention. Thank you, Mr. President. Can I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Session is suspended.
Yung on record. Tapos yung ano mo na, yung usual.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Minority Leader, Mr.
Since
President.
I just assume that the good sponsor, as in the other treaties, would agree that in the period of amendments, we insert the standard clause requiring Senate concurrence in the withdrawal from the treaty. So with that, Mr. President, we have no more questions.
Majority Leader.
Yes, let's proceed with the individual amendment, Mr. President. That's what was on the floor anyway. So may I move that we recognize a minority leader for the resolutory.
I have one individual amendment, Mr. President.
I beg your indulgence, Mr. President. The sponsor first.
On the sixth whereas clause of the first page of Resolution 616, change the word agreement to convention. It will now read, whereas the President of the Philippines ratified the convention on 9 December, etc., etc. So just changing it to convention. That's all, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Agreement to convention.
Yes, Mr. President, may
So
we propose
minority leaders
an
recognized.
individual amendment. Insert as a final resolutory clause the following: resolve finally that the President of the Philippines may, with the concurrence of 2/3 of all the members of the Senate, withdraw from the convention.
Accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No other amendment. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading the post-Senate Resolution 616, resolution concurring in the accession to the Convention on Cybercrime.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of PS Resolution 616.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Social Security.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the Coconut Farmers and Industry Development Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is we're still in the period of individual amendments, considering that this is a substitute bill. So I move to continue with the period of individual amendments and move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Francis Pangilinan, and to introduce individual amendments, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Recto, and Senator Soto, Mr. President.
Can we ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President, to allow Senator Pangilinan to come down? He is in this room.
Make it a few minutes, Mr. President, so that
Session is
it will
suspended.
be ample time.
Meron ba nasa agenda pala yun?
Break muna. Andun natin. Okay, no problem. Thank you, sir.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before the break, on the floor was the consideration of Senate Bill 1233. And we asked the sponsor, Senator Pangilinan, be recognized and to introduce individual amendments is Senator Cynthia Villar, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. President, based on my committee report 234, which I read a while ago, I wish to propose a number of amendments aimed at enhancing the spirit of Senate Bill 1233. Okay. On Section 8, in terms of the deployment of the trust fund for investment purposes, this representation strongly feels that as a businesswoman, investing in stocks, commodities, futures, and options would be very risky for a trust fund that is endowed with public interest, even where the services of fund managers are engaged. So on page 3, line 20, delete the phrase criteria for selection of fund managers.
Page 3, line 20. We accept the proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 7, I propose to delete lines 2 to 15, lines 12 to 15 under section 8 and replace this with the following provision. To ensure the safety of the fund and for assured returns, all of the trust fund shall be placed only in Philippine government securities.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there
Mr.
any objection? There
Sponsor.
being none, motion is approved.
Still on the same page and section, lines 17 and 18, delete the phrase "and appointed fund managers for the trust fund."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Last on the same page, delete lines 20A and 20B. Okay, same section.
Accepted.
Is there any
Thank you.
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The chair also proposes to add a new paragraph in section 9 at the lowest portion of page 7-8 as follows. The yearly income of the COCO Levy Trust Fund shall be utilized as follows. A, Shared Facilities Program, 35%. B, Health Assistance and Scholarship Program, 15%. C, Empowerment of Coconut Farmer Organization and their cooperatives, 15%. D, Credit through Land Bank and DBP, 20%. And E, Farm Improvement to encourage self-sufficiency, 15%, for a total of 100%.
Yes, before we accept the proposed amendment, it is with the understanding that we will have a separate definition of terms in terms of, at least which I caught earlier, shared facilities program, with that understanding.
Okay, I accept that.
With that understanding, we accept the proposed amendment.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Another paragraph goes together with this, also in page 7-8, which reads as follows. Projects and activities relating to shared facilities and farm improvements shall be implemented to support community development and encourage community-managed enterprises such as community nurseries, processing facilities, and fertilizer production.
Accepted.
Okay. Thank you.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 8, section 10, lines 7 and 8, to make the role of the Bureau of Treasury consistent with the previous amendment, I propose to delete the entire item C so that item D becomes item C.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On section 11 on the same page, line 70, after the word industry, insert the phrase the Department of Science and Technology.
Accepted.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We now go to page 9 to provide greater focus and more accountable programs, not just on the productivity of the coconut plant and its byproducts, but also on the additional sources of income for coconut farmers. I wish to propose the following. On page 9, between lines 8 and 9, I propose to insert a new item and the following phrase: intensive effort on intercropping and livestock raising, and to renumber the subsequent items accordingly.
Intensive effort on intercropping and livestock raising. Accepted.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page, in line 13, I propose to insert the word crop between the words coconut and productivity.
Accepted.
Okay.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the following line, which is line 14, I propose to delete the word including and insert before the words intercropping and livestock raising, and to renumber the subsequent items accordingly.
Accepted.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
In the same section on page 10, line 7, remove the word and. Relative to this, we propose to add in the last line of the same paragraph the following provision: and in that all projects shall be evaluated on the basis of financial returns subject to guidelines and benchmarks to be promulgated by the committee.
Could we include, if the good sponsor of the proposed amendment is willing, including, what was the first term? Subject to?
Guidelines and benchmarks to be promulgated by the committee.
Yes, the financial,
Yeah.
there was a,
Okay.
what was the term? May we have the financial returns?
Okay.
Yes.
So subject to guidelines, benchmark, and financial returns.
Yes. We would like to include perhaps the term increased incomes as one of the benchmarks, if the proponent is willing.
Accept.
With that, we accept the proposed amended with our proposal, with our proposed amendment to the amendment.
Also on page 10, you moved.
Yes, and how would that now read?
May we have the proposed amendment?
Okay. And that all projects shall be evaluated on the basis of financial returns and subject to guidelines and benchmarks to be promulgated by the committee.
So it will read subject to financial returns and increased incomes. Shall be evaluated.
Subject to financial returns and increased income.
And increased farmer income.
On the basis of financial returns and increased farmers' income.
Thank
Is
you.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you.
Also on page 10, still under section 11 of the bill, the chair also proposes to insert between lines 10 and 11 two new paragraphs that will read as follows. The committee shall identify some coconut oil mills to be rehabilitated for the benefit of the small coconut farmers. The rehabilitation of the said oil mills shall be funded through the General Appropriations Act under the budget of the Philippine Coconut Authority. The committee will also identify the oil mills that will be sold or privatized, the proceeds of which shall be used to rehabilitate the identified oil mills that are useful to small coconut farmers.
Accepted.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 10A, line 24, delete the phrase provided that no fund shall be invested in prohibited investments.
Accepted.
Okay.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page, lines 25 and 26, delete item C and renumber the succeeding items accordingly.
Accepted.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 12, section 13, lines 6 to 9, in place of the Secretary of Agriculture as co-chairman, substitute him with the chairman of the board of the Philippine Coconut Authority. Thus, lines 5 and 6 of the section will read as follows. The committee shall be composed of the Secretary of Finance as chairman, chairman of the board of the Philippine Coconut Authority as co-chairman, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Director General of NEDA, and the Secretary of Trade and Industry.
Accepted.
The chairman of... Okay.
We
Is there
accept
any
the proposed
objection?
amendment.
There being none, motion is approved.
The chairman of the PCA is hereby proposed to become the co-chairman, while the DA secretary shall become a member instead.
We accept the proposed amendment.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same line, lines 26, after the word organization, delete the period and replace it with a semicolon and insert the following proviso. Provided that the PCA is given 3 months to complete the Coconut Farmers Registry, after which the committee shall conduct the nomination and screening process within the succeeding 3 months. The list of nominees shall be submitted to the President immediately thereafter.
Accepted.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We will go to page 17. With respect to the projects and programs to be funded from the earnings of the Coco Levy Trust Fund, the Chair would like to further strengthen the sustainability of the benefits from said program and projects with the following amendment. On page 17, between lines 7 and 18, I propose to add a new section 25, mandated appropriations for the Philippine Coconut Authority, that will have the following provisions. To further support the Coconut Farmers and Industry Development Fund, aimed at increasing the income of coconut farmers, the developmental support activities of the Philippine Coconut Authority shall continue to be funded through the General Appropriation Act and shall receive a yearly appropriation of not less than 5 billion every year for the following program and purposes. A, infrastructure program, 20%, planting and replanting, 20%, intercropping, 10%, shared facilities, 20%, research and development, 10%, fertilization, 5%, new products and marketing, 5%, overhead, 10%, for a total of 100%.
Yes, Mr. President, with the understanding that this provision is to spell out that in no way will the Coco Levy Trust Fund be utilized to fund the ongoing funding requirements of the Philippine Coconut Authority. We accept the proposed amendment.
Thank you.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Finally, Mr. President, the Committee on Agriculture and Food has been advocating for the establishment of farm schools in order to further pursue the propagation of hybrid coconut seedlings that can produce 150 nuts a year per tree, as well as provide extension services, training, education to coconut farmers on the cultivation, nurturing, caring, harvesting, processing, and marketing of coconut trees, its fruits, products, and byproducts. In this connection, the Chair also proposes a new Section 26 after the new Section 25 to be titled Farm Schools and Human Resource Development for the Coconut Industry. The new section shall have the following provisions. The Philippine Coconut Authority, in coordination with the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, shall endeavor to establish coconut industry farm school in every coconut-producing province to support and enlarge the trained human resource pool of coconut farmers and help them become more productive, more competitive, and adept at intercropping with such alternative farm crops as cacao, coffee, banana, and other suitable activities such as livestock raising.
We accept the proposed amendment.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, my fellow senator, I wish to thank you all for this opportunity to contribute to the enhancement of Senate Bill 1233 by way of amendments. That will be all, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader.
We'd like to thank the good Senator Villar, the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, on her amendments. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Mr. President, unless the presiding officer is ready, we will have to ask for a clean copy as amended and accepted by the sponsor, and therefore move for the suspension.
Yeah. Before the suspension, Majority Leader, with your permission and the permission of the body, just one clarification or one question to the sponsor of this committee report. I've read an article recently that there is a new case involving the Coco Levy funds. Is that correct?
New case. There is there is a new decision in the Sandigan Bayan, Mr. President.
And what is this decision all about? Just wanted to be updated for the record, yes.
We don't have the information now, Mr. President, the details, but we will get the details, Mr. President, and we will inform the Senate President Pro Tem.
Thank you very much.
Of course, our
colleagues, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, Majority Leader.
Anong kaso yun?
Dito.
No, we will just go through it and then inform our colleagues and the Senate President Pro Tem in writing,
All right.
Mr. President.
All right, so we'll reschedule the period of individual amendments at a later time. So in the meantime, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1233 and ask that the Secretariat be directed to give the members a clean copy after the amendments have been accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Senator Villar. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1636 under Committee Report 213.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
This is the measure on Lifetime Cell Phone Number Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of individual amendments, considering that this is a substitute bill. So may we now recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and to introduce amendments, Senator Lacson, Mr. President.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized together with Senator Lacson to propose amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I introduce my individual amendment, and there's only one amendment that I'm proposing, may I seek clarification on a few issues?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand that in this proposed measure, a Globe user can move to Smart and vice versa and can still remain or retain his or her original mobile number?
Correct, Mr. President.
Yeah. And with this provision, the 4-digit prefix, say 0917, 0918,
correct,
and so forth and so on, will no longer matter since this can be brought by the subscriber when he moves to another network?
Yes, Mr. President, this was extensively discussed during the hearing on the said bill, and the mechanism now is the mobile subscriber can now bring his number anywhere, regardless of who is the network provider. In that case, the prefix, which is 0917 for Globe and 0918 for Smart, will no longer matter because that
particular number will be assigned to that particular subscriber, Mr. President.
And the prefix will no longer be reflected in all mobile calls.
It will be reflected, Mr. President, but for example, if you're presently with Globe and then you transfer to Smart, your 0917 will effectively be a Smart number.
Smart number, but even the prefix will no longer be changed.
Yes, Mr. President. Correct, Mr. President.
So my question is, and this will lead to my proposed amendment, is this: how much is the interconnection revenue, or how much in interconnection revenue does a PTE, the Public Telecommunications Entity, earn on a yearly basis in relation to the total operating revenue?
Mr. President, based on the information from NTC, Globe Telecom earned 800 million pesos for interconnection fees, Mr. President, and Smart unfortunately did not report any of their interconnecting or interconnection revenue to NTC, which is actually a very questionable, but we assume that there's a 50-50 market share for both telecom, Mr. President. So both telecom company earned approximately 800 million pesos for interconnection fees, Mr. President.
Thank you. And as a matter of fact, I have the same data as supplied by the National Telecommunications Commission with information that indeed they share on a 50-50 basis the revenue earned for interconnection charges or fees. And so, since...
Mr. President, let me just interject very quickly. I also talked to Commissioner Cabarrios yesterday to clarify this matter, Mr. President. And in the interconnection fees, which is divided into three, the national category covers the mobile phone interconnection fees. The local network category covers, apparently, according to him, the SMS and the landline. The local network category is about 2.4 billion pesos, Mr. President. So if you add the national and the local network interconnection fees, that will be approximately 3.2 billion pesos, Mr. President. But let me just clarify this and put stress on this, that the explanation of Commissioner Cabarrios was only verbal, you know, and he was actually explaining it to us to his best of his abilities. So to be conservative about it, Mr. President, the revenues earned from interconnection will be between 800 million pesos to about 3.2 billion pesos, Mr. President.
My understanding, Mr. President, is that, and this also came from the NTC, is that national interconnection revenue, which is amounting to 806.9 million pesos in 2016, would only constitute the interconnection fee on domestic calls, including short message or SMS. No, and the international and local network would pertain to the gateway or the charges from international calls going into the network, the local network. So, having said that, if we base our computation on the 806.9 million, it will be a measly 0.82% of the total operating revenue in 2016 of 98.35 billion pesos.
Correct, Mr. President.
And having said that, since it is a minuscule amount compared to the total operating revenue, this representation is proposing an amendment so as not to impose any more interconnection fees or charges for calls made from one telecommunication or one network to another. And if I may, the following is my individual amendment. May I proceed, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
On page 4, insert, because we are here to protect the consumers. And the consumers not being made aware that he is calling through a different network or PTE is helpless in being charged, with 2 pesos and 50 centavos for calls, mobile calls, and 15 centavos for SMS. And so my amendment would be on page 4, insert a new section 10 after line 19 to read as follows. Section 10, non-imposition of interconnectivity fee / charge. No interconnectivity fee / charge shall be imposed by any public telecommunications entity or PTE, open close parenthesis, PTE for domestic calls / short message service, open close, SMS, made by a subscriber after the effectivity of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
I accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President.
Yeah,
Mr.
another
President.
amendment.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to just manifest that and commend the Senator Lacson for making this proposal, because, Mr. President, this is really another barrier to entry for the third-party telecom, because a lot of our subscribers are already trapped to a single network because they are avoiding interconnection fees. By removing the interconnection fees, actually it will now give the freedom to the subscriber to move around, without penalizing them for interconnection fees.
And if I may add, Mr. President, what a PTE takes in, it also gives out. Because if it charges connectivity or interconnection fee from another mobile network, it will also pay to the as expense to the other network.
Yes.
So it will just cancel out, Mr. President.
Yes, I agree, Mr. President. And again, just to commend Senator Lacson, with this amendment, he managed to save the consumers almost 6 billion pesos in interconnection fees. So this is actually a lot of savings to our consumers, considering that every time you call another network, you are charged 2 pesos and 50 centavos per minute. This is on top of a 7 pesos and 50 centavos per minute call.
Even on drop calls, no?
Even on drop calls. So this is not let me reiterate, Mr. President, it's not a one-time interconnection fee, but a per minute interconnection fee. So it's actually
so you owe me 6 billion over 100 million. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, and again, I commend Senator Lacson for pointing this out and making the necessary amendment, Mr. President.
Next, Mr. President, the Minority Leader. Still on the individual amendments.
Minority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Chamber, we propose on page 3, line 30, insert the following paragraph. The cost of carrying out the obligation under this section shall not, directly or indirectly, be passed on to the subscribers.
I accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 4, line 3. Page 4, line 3, insert the following. Quote, the recipient provider shall prompt the caller or sender that the number being reached has switched to a different service provider, period. The announcement shall, as far as reasonably practicable, provide details on relevant tariff or service information.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
sa line. We'll just and then okay, sige, I'll just manifest. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
During the break, the good sponsor explained the difficulty of the proposal that we have made. He assured us that the concerns will be addressed through the rules and regulations that will be issued by the National Telecommunications Commission, and the appropriate amendment along that line will be made on lines 17 up to line 27 on page 5 in order to address that concern.
Yes, Mr. President. We kept it, or we gave the NTC the responsibility to come up with specific rules and guidelines so that it will be technology neutral, meaning that they can impose other things that will not be or that can be adaptable in the future, depending on what type of technology that will come in the future, Mr. President. So for example, So for example, Mr. President, if it's going to be a voice prompt or a text prompt or an email prompt or whatever prompt in the future, Mr. President, we will let NTC decide on that, depending on what type of technology that will already be implemented, Mr. President.
But the concept that an announcement providing the details of the relevant tariff and service information will be issued by the NTC, and the language towards that will be incorporated in line 17 to 27.
Yes, Mr. President, in line 20, number 2, the specific rights and obligation of mobile subscriber, Mr. President, we think that this encapsulates the rights of the mobile subscriber to know if he is being transferred to another mobile network, Mr. President.
Can we make it more specific? The specific rights and obligations of mobile subscribers, including what?
Notification. Including notification.
Yes, including.
Mr. President, we can, subject to style, including notification of, including porting notification to the subscriber, Mr. President. Subject to style, Mr. President.
Okay, yes, if we can have that, then we can withdraw our amendment.
Yes, Mr. President, earlier we talked about the intention of the proposal, Mr. President. It's really to notify or to prompt the subscriber that he is calling someone outside of his network, Mr. President. And we can actually propose something to that effect that will be reflected in the said bill, Mr. President.
Yeah, and that will be specifically on page 5, line 20.
Yes, Mr. President, page 5, line 20.
So we'll just wait for that, and That should settle this issue. The third proposed amendment is on page 4, line 17. Insert a new paragraph which will provide as follows. Without prejudice to an existing reasonable minimum contractual period, the donor providers shall not impose conditions and procedures for contract termination or for completion of a porting application which have the effect of serving as the disincentive or deterrence against moving to a different service provider.
One minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended for a minute.
Ready to resume,
Mr. President. Tama ba?
Okay. We have a pending proposed amendment. May we know?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
There is a pending reaction to the second amendment proposed by the minority leader. When can we be ready with that?
Mr. President, will furnish the body a copy by tomorrow, Mr. President.
All right, then that means I move to suspend consideration of
With the permission,
Senate.
with the permission of the majority leader, just one query from the chair. The bill talks about the portability of a mobile phone number. Okay? How does one apply for the portability in the bill?
Mr. President,
Let's say I'm using Smart now,
right.
and I think I'll get a better service, let's say, from Globe. And that's why I want to use my number in Smart to Globe, but I'm changing my network provider. How do you apply?
Mr. President, you will inform your network that you will be transferring.
How do you inform your network?
We included that in the IRR, that the NTC will now come up with a procedure on how the subscriber will inform the network. But it should be within 24 hours, and it should be free, Mr. President. But the mechanism for them to inform, whether it's through the internet or through a written application, we will leave that to the NTC to come up with that.
That is the most important feature in this bill, isn't it so?
Yes, Mr. President.
Applying for the portability, and we're leaving that to the NTC.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President. Well, Mr. President,
and how do you envision it to look like? How does one apply? Is there any other country that does this?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, we have 110 countries.
With portability.
Yes, globally. And
what is the best practice on applying? How do they apply?
Through various ways, Mr. President. You can do it through the internet. For example, if the network will provide a electronic form for you to apply, you can actually do a manual application. But the most important, Mr. President, is within 24 hours, this is already effective. So the networks will not prolong the actual portability and make it a barrier.
I'm just saying how it should work. So I apply, let's say I'm using Globe right now, I want to go to Smart. Example lang. Say number ko Globe. And I think I'll get a better deal with Smart. Tama? Okay. But I want to use my same number, right?
Yes, Mr. President.
So I will apply. First, we're leaving it to the NTC to determine.
Yes, Mr. President. The steps and the procedures, Mr. President. But it should be confined within 24 hours, Mr. President.
And it could be that I will, NTC will say that I applied Inform Smart that I'm changing to Globe, Inform Globe that I've informed Smart that I'm going to Globe. Parang ganon.
Yes, Mr. President. It's all done electronically, Mr. President. During the hearing, NTC told us that all of this will be happening electronically, Mr. President. There's no paper shuffling from another network to another.
One final question. Will there be an additional cost?
No, Mr. President. We specified that in the bill that it will be free of charge to the customer, Mr. President.
I understand that portion of it. But as far as the telecom companies are concerned, will there be an additional cost?
There'll be minimal cost, Mr. President, depending on the technology. This is what NTC told us, that in different countries that you use different technology. But for example, here in our country, since we have only 2 telecom companies, it's virtually one telecom company will just send the other telecom company electronically the numbers being ported, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Does that mean also, Mr. President, that if you're using a smart number and you want to open an account in Globe using the same number, is that possible?
That's what it's all about, Mr. President.
No, you're not removing the Globe number.
No, you cannot. The sponsor?
Sorry, Mr. President, may I...
If I have a Globe number, I want to use Smart also because there are areas where Globe is poor. The signal is poor. I want the same number.
2 accounts, same number. 1 in Globe, 1 in Smart.
Mr. President, I don't think that's possible because one person will only have 1 number, Mr. President.
So that means it's not possible.
I'm so sorry, Mr. President.
It will not happen?
You mean switching, Mr. President, from one...
No, not switching.
Not switching. 2 numbers, 1 number, 2 service providers.
No, that's
not contemplated in the
I
bill.
don't think that's possible. I don't think that's technologically possible, Mr. President, as of the moment, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. In the meantime, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1636 and will await the proposal, the final.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1317 under Committee Report 100.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the measure on occupational safety and health standards. The parliamentary status of the measure is that last week we already closed the period of committee amendments. Then afterwards, the sponsor, Senator Villanueva, introduced his individual amendments with the agreement that it will not be acted upon until such time that clean copies will be distributed to all the senators and so that we may take action and consideration, Mr. President. So now, at this point, we now recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Labor, Senator Joel Villanueva, and to introduce individual amendments together with the approval of all the individual amendments that Senator Villanueva introduced. We can do this page by page. Mr. President, I move to recognize Senator Villanueva and any member of the Senate who would have an amendment on every page that we shall take up.
Senator Joel Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, may I just add only a few editorial amendments to Senate Bill number 1317. The draft we will be using is the one dated February 6, 2018, Mr. President. On page 2, line 3B, after the word...
Mr. President, before we do so, as I said, to facilitate the proceedings, let's start with the amendments page by page. So let's start with page 1, Mr. President. If there are any amendments on page 1. There are no amendments on page 1, so I move to approve page 1, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There be none. Motion is approved.
Now, on page 2,
Yes.
the sponsor apparently has amendments to propose, but he has already proposed from lines 3 to lines 19G. May we know the line number of the proposed amendment on page 2?
It's on page 2, line 3B, Mr. President.
Line 3B.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President.
After the word on, delete the phrase in all industries where work.
So it shall read, safety based on is being undertaken in all
Yes.
budget, et cetera, et cetera.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 2.
In all industries where work.
In all industries where work.
3B, page 2, line 3B. We delete in all industries where
After
work.
the word on.
And after the word on.
Anong number?
Page 2, line 2.
There is an anterior amendment by the Minority Leader, Mr. President. Still on page 2.
This is all on page 2, so I will put on record the proposed amendments. On page 2, line 2, delete the word all right?
Okay.
On this page, on page 2, line 2, delete the word all before the word establishment. On the same page, line 3, delete the period after the word workplaces and insert a comma.
Okay.
And after the comma, insert the words based on the number of employees, nature of operations, and the risk or hazard involved. On the same page, to line 3B, delete the words based on the number of employees, comma, nature of operations, and the risk or hazard involved, and after the word safety, insert the words for such purpose. The proposed section 2 will now read as follows.
Okay.
Section 2, coverage. This act shall apply to establishments, projects, sites, and other workplaces based on the number of employees, nature of operations, the risk or hazard involved, period. The Secretary of Labor and Employment shall issue the appropriate standards of occupational health and safety for such purpose.
We accept the proposed amendment, Mr. President.
With the permission of the body,
Yes.
may we have a minute suspension? I think there's a...
Halika. Halika rito.
Oo.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
So the President, Mr. President, the motion is to approve the proposed amendments from lines 2 to lines 5.
Yeah. Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, if the minority leader wishes to make a proposal on page 2, the same page, line 5D, I would like to just
go ahead.
May I?
We have no amendment on
5B.
for lines 5B to 5H.
Yes. May I have the floor, Mr. President?
Yes.
Yes. On page 2, line 5D, insert the word "or" between the words risk and hazard. So it will become risk or hazard.
Risk or
hazard.
hazard.
You do not have any other amendment from line 5B to 5H other than that?
Nothing, Mr. President.
Therefore, Mr. President, the proposed amendment shall now read, Section 3, applicability to micro and small enterprises, MSEs, in close and open parentheses. Specific to micro and small enterprises, MSEs, the Secretary of Labor and Employment, considering the risk or hazard involved, shall develop appropriate OA standards to include housekeeping, materials handling and storage, electrical and mechanical safety, chemical safety, emergency preparedness, fire safety, and PPE.
Yes.
So move.
So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The reason we're doing this, Mr. President, is these are the proposed individual amendments of the sponsor that we have not approved yet, and that is the reason we are approving it now in total, Mr. President. Any other amendment on page 2? I have an amendment on line 19C. 19C, Mr. President, insert the word wherein after the word undertaken. Remove the punctuation mark, comma, and replace it with wherein.
We accept, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there any other amendment on page 2?
So page 4 now.
No more amendment on page 2. I move that we approve page 2, Mr. President, as amended.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 2A.
No amendment.
No other individual amendments on page 2A. I move to approve Page 2A, as amended.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 3.
Yes. On page 3, we have an amendment just on the on line 28, which is actually the title of the chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Yes. We propose to change the title of chapter 2 as stated in line 28 as duties and rights of employers, workers, and other persons. We propose that the title should be core standards applicable to all establishments.
We accept, Mr. President, the proposed amendment.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Any other amendment on page 3? There are no amendments on page 3, Mr. President. I move that we approve page 3.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 4, Mr. President, I have a proposed amendment on page 4, line 4C. If there is no anterior amendment,
Anterior amendment on line 1 on page 4.
the minority leader, Mr. President.
Insert the word, after the word "and" on line
1.
on line 1. Insert the phrase "where necessary."
We accept the proposed
Is there any
amendment.
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 4, line 3, delete the word "and." On the same page,
Is that
line-
amendment accepted?
Yes, Mr. President.
Is there any
The first
objection?
one.
There being none, motion is approved.
on the same page, line 4F,
Mr. President, anterior amendment on
Yes, all
page
right.
4, line 4C.
4C.
4C, Mr. President, remove the article "and" and replace it with the punctuation mark, comma.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Also, page 4, line D, 4D, delete the words "for improvement of" and replace it to "improve the."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The minority leader, Mr. President.
on the same page, line 4F, insert the following paragraph, parenthesis 7, parenthesis, provide, comma, where necessary, comma, for measures to deal with emergencies and accidents, comma, including first aid arrangements.
We accept the proposal, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No more amendment on page.
Mr. President,
I'm sorry.
I have,
I'm sorry.
Page 4.
Line, andito pa, ano? Page 4.
Line 17B, Mr. President.
Yeah.
If there is no anterior amendment on page 4, line 17B, move that the word "simultaneously," after the word "simultaneously," delete the preposition "at" and replace it with "in." Editorial amendment, Mr. President.
accepted, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 4.
Still on page 4,
Yes.
we propose to delete lines 23 to 27 because this will
Yes,
result in...
I agree. I was about to make an amendment, and this was a part of the interpellation, Mr. President.
Is
and,
there any objection?
I agree, Mr. President.
There being none, motion is approved.
Thank
So
you.
lines 23 to 27 on page 4 is already deleted.
Yes,
All right, still on page 4,
page 4.
line 33, we want to transfer we want to transfer to page 4 on line 33 the following paragraphs which were originally section 14 to 16 of the bill and renumber them accordingly. Sections 14 to 16 are in the, on pages, six and 6 up to 6, lines 29 down to line 41, and on page 7, lines 1 and 2. We move them, we propose to insert them on page 4, line 33.
And renumber accordingly.
And be renumbered accordingly.
We accept the proposed amendment, Mr.
Is there
President.
any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
If there are no other amendments on page 4, I move to approve page 4, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Wait, Mr. President. Still on page 4?
Huh? Saan? 1 minute suspension, sir.
Session is suspended.
Huh?
I-check nyo ako yung
Page 4.
sa iba na kailangan alam natin.
Yes.
Kasi
Yung sunod na. On page 4, lines 34 to 40 and 4A, delete the entire section, the workers' reference, and because it will be moved. Huh? Oh, sige. Dapat sinabi nyo na that it is being moved to this. Huh? Saan siya?
na yung page 4. Page 5 na talaga.
Hindi.
Kasi nag-move na siya.
Why don't you, when you move it, cite the page and the line?
Nag-move na. Tapos yung, so nasa 5.
Page 4, lines 34 to 40, delete the entire section 9, and then what will happen to this? Page, why don't we just move this to page so and so, rather than delete? What do you want to page?
Ililipat lang. Dun dinala. So kaya nga, bababa ngayon lahat siya. So magbabago talaga yung
That's how it is. Rather than you say delete, because if asked you
nata-transfer lang, di ba? Nata-transfer lang. Okay.
Sige.
We ready to resume, Mr. President?
Yes,
Session is resumed.
We're still on page 4.
Still on page 4, Mr. President. On page 4, lines 34 to 40, and on page 5,
4A.
I'm sorry, 4A, lines 41 to 44, move that entire section, now section 9, and insert it on page 5, after line 34C.
We accept the proposed amendment, Mr. President. Tama.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Okay.
Therefore, after that, Mr. President, I move to approve page 4 as amended.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to approve page 4A is removed, Mr. President.
It's transferred.
Transferred. So we proceed to page 5.
Ito po yan ang page 5. If I may, Mr. President, page 5, line 8, before the word shall, insert the phrase covered workplaces. So move.
Line 8.
Line 8, page 5.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 10 na to. Wala na. So, sa page 10 pa. Tapos yung dito sa akin, wala din yung page.
Okay lang, okay lang. Hindi, sasabihin ko lang sa
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President.
On page
5.
on page 5, line 4, just change the title instead of chapter 3, instead of occupational safety and health program and organization, we just insert the phrase covered workplaces.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Line, ano yun?
Line 4,
line
Mr.
4
Majority.
of the title.
Then just the title. No more amendments on page
5.
5.
Mr. President, on page 5,
Yes.
line 34B and 34C,
34.
delete the phrase at their place of work and replace it with the phrase in the workplace.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We have no more amendments on page 5. Move to approve page 5 as amended, including the amendments of Senator Villanero.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 6.
Page 6, lines 29 to 41, and lines, unless there are anterior amendments, my amendment is on line 29, Mr. Majority Leader.
Yes. No other interior amendments, President.
On page 6, delete lines 29 to 41 and lines 1 and 2 on page 7. These are the sections on safety signage and devices, safety in the use of equipment, and occupational safety information, which we transferred to
Page 4. Yeah, which
to
was
chapter
transferred
2.
a while ago. Yes. We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No more amendment on page 6, Your Honor.
Move to approve page 6, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 7, Mr. President.
No amendment on page 7 on
I move to approve the amendments on page 7, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 8.
On page 8, Mr. President, section 19 on page 8, lines 4 to 12, the provisions are to be moved to chapter 2. Is this correct?
Yeah, yun, di ba? Kanina. It was included a while ago. Yes, we accepted that
We accepted it
proposal
previously.
a while ago, Mr. President.
Okay.
Kanina pa yun, di ba? So, natatalo naman. Okay.
We have no more amendments on page 8.
Move to approve page 8 as amended, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Page 9.
Page 9, on page 4, insert the, I'm sorry,
Line-
I'm
line
sorry,
4.
page 9, line 4, insert the following. The procedure for inspecting work premises notifying employers of violations, and issuing compliance or stoppage orders shall be pursuant to the procedure laid down in Article 128 as implemented by relevant regulations issued by the Department of Labor on administration and enforcement of labor laws, period. The inspector or person authorized by the Department of Labor to enforce compliance with OSH standards shall present proper identification upon request, and such inspector or person shall only act within the authority or direction given to him by the Secretary of Labor.
We accept and we concur with the proposed amendment of the Minority Floor Leader.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Still on page 9. Still on page 9. Line 25. Delete the word recognized and insert government between the words competent and authority, so that the section 24 will now read, the authority to enforce mandatory OSH standards may be delegated by the Secretary of Labor and Employment to a competent government authority.
We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We, thank you, Mr. President. We propose to delete lines on the same page, page 9. We propose to delete lines 27 to line 30.
We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On all right. On page 9, lines 46. This is on section 27, employment insurance. This provision seeks to amend the Social Security Act, clearly a rider to this bill, which is occupational safety and health, occupational safety and health. It directs the Social Security system to promulgate rules and regulations so that employment insurance can be adopted. This is clearly a rider, Mr. President, and it violates the Constitution. So we propose to delete lines 46 to 49 on page 9 and lines 1 and 2 on page 10.
Mr. President, we don't want any rider in this proposed measure, and so we agree, and we accept the proposed amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to approve page 9, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We now move to page 10. Unless there is any other, well, I don't think there will be an anterior amendment. I have a proposed amendment from on page 10, lines 3A to 3B. And let me propose, these are usually editorial amendments, Mr. President, but it covers the entire section 28. So let me start by saying that on line 3A to 3B, after the word B, insert the article an, and in the same line after the word established, delete the article A, Mr. President.
We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page, line 3C, replace the word deserving with the word qualified.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Still on the same page and line 3E.
Is there any objection? There
I'm
being
sorry.
none, motion is approved.
Line 3E, Mr. President, after the word compliance, replace the preposition on with off.
We accept the proposal, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
And also on the same page, line 3G, after the word recognition, delete the article and replace it with the punctuation mark, comma.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The next proposed amendment is on line 24D, so if there are
Before
any
that,
amendments, yes.
anterior amendment. Before I propose an amendment on this is pertaining to lines 4 to 10 on which is section 29 on page 10. Mr. President, the State Insurance Fund was established in lieu of the Workmen's Compensation Act. Under the old law, the Workmen's Compensation Act, the workers claim compensation for work-related injuries or ailment. That is why instead of that system wherein the worker would have to litigate before the Workmen's Compensation Commission for the payment of work-related injuries or illness, the State Insurance Fund was established, wherein the employers would pay a premium in order that they cover the risk for work-related injuries, so that there is no longer litigation or administrative proceedings to claim workmen's compensation for work-related injuries. So why are we imposing a penalty when on the employer when claim is made on the State Insurance Fund, even if the claim is based on violation of occupational safety standards? This is a penalty being imposed when in fact the employer has insured his risk by paying premium to the State Insurance Fund. So why are we imposing a liability, a penalty for an additional penalty of 25% of the lump sum equivalent to the income payable to the worker after due process? I cannot understand the rationale for this, so if we can explain. Otherwise, if it can't be justified, I will move for the deletion of this provision.
Mr. President, I cannot agree more with the statements made by our minority floor leader. And this is not an additional, Mr. President, but this has been an part of the existing law in the labor code. And that's why if the good gentleman, it is an existing, Mr. President. So
is there a provision in the labor code on this?
Yes, Mr.
I stand
President.
corrected then. What,
yes.
Can we cite the specific article, and can you read it for the record?
Can I have?
Yeah. As I said, we want an explanation so that we may or may not amend. If it is an existing provision in the labor code, then we can let it stay.
Baka kapi sa employer yan, ha?
Article 200, safety devices. Sa PD 626 yan, sorry, sir.
Napakaliit.
Ano ba? Yan, Article 200 ng PD 626.
Article 200 of PD
200?
626, Article 200, safety devices. In case the employee's injury or death was due to the failure of the employer to comply with any law or to install and maintain safety devices or take other precautions for the prevention of injury, said employer shall pay to the State Insurance Fund a penalty of 25% of the lump sum equivalent of the income benefit payable by the system to the employee. All employers, especially those who have been paying a rate of contribution higher than that required of them under this title, are enjoined to undertake and strengthen measures for the occupational health and safety of their employees.
Well, if it is there already in the labor code, why do we have to repeat it here? We can delete this and do...
We will submit to the wisdom of our distinguished colleague, Mr. President.
Just as a matter of style, you know, if you repeat it here and not repeat everything, I'm afraid that...
I agree, Mr. President, and if the distinguished gentleman is moving for the deletion of this particular provision, we will accept, Mr. President.
So we so move that we delete lines 4 to 10 on page 10 for the reason that it is already provided in Article 200 of the Labor Code of the Philippines.
All right.
As agreed upon and as reiterated by the Minority Floor Leader, we accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Still, on page 10, if there are no
Line.
line 24A, Mr. President.
Before that,
yes.
we have
Okay.
anterior amendment on line 12 and 13.
12 and 13.
Lines 12 and 13. Instead of unlawful acts, why don't we just say prohibited acts? So that it is not...
Yeah, because we you know.
So we propose
Yeah.
on page 10, lines 11 and lines
I think 12 and
13.
Yes.
Instead of unlawful, we say prohibited. So there are two unlawfuls there, unlawful acts on line 12, and again at the end of line 12, unlawful acts. So instead of unlawful, we replace it with prohibited.
We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
What is the purpose of this amendment on this one?
On line 24A, Mr. President, on the same page, insert the word repeated before the word obstruction. So moved.
Repeated obstruction, Mr. President.
Before the word obstruction.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
24D, Mr. President, I have a
24D.
proposed amendment.
Yes, Mr.
Before
President.
that, sorry, on line 13, if the
13.
line
right.
13,
13.
insert the following on line 13.
30?
No, 1-3, sir.
13.
1-3.
1-3.
Willful failure or refusal of an employer, comma, contractor or subcontractor to comply with the required OSH standards or with a compliance order issued by the Secretary of Labor and Employment or by the Secretary's authorized representative shall make such employer, contractor, or subcontractor liable for an administrative fine not exceeding 100,000 pesos per day until the violation is corrected, counted from the date the employer or contractor is notified of the violation or the date of compliance order is duly served on the employer. The amount of fine imposed shall depend on the frequency or gravity of the violation committed or the damage caused, semicolon, provided, however, that the maximum amount shall be imposed only when the violation exposes the workers to a risk of death, comma, serious injury, or serious illness.
We accept the proposed amendment, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The next amendment is on line 24, unless there is an anterior amendment, Mr. Majority Leader.
The 24D, Mr. President, so you may proceed.
Okay, on line 24, insert the following paragraph. An employer, contractor, or subcontractor who willfully fails or refuses to comply with the required OSH standards, comma, or with a duly issued compliance order, comma, and engages in any of the following acts to aid, conceal, or facilitate such non-compliance shall be liable for a maximum of 100,000 pesos administrative fine, separate from the daily fine imposed above.
We accept, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No more amendment on line 24.
Mr. President, on line 24D to 24E,
24.
delete the phrase establishment, project, site, or place where work compliance is being undertaken And replace the phrase with covered workplace for consistency.
We accept, yes, for consistency, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Then on 24F, on the same page, before the word access, insert the word allow.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there
Thank you,
any
Mr.
objection?
President.
There
And
being
finally,
none,
on
motion's
the
approved.
24O, thank you, Mr.
24O.
President. 24O, after the word pay, just delete the conjunction or and insert the punctuation mark, comma.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
In lines 25 to 29, Mr. President, I'd like to move for the deletion of these lines 25 to 29 on the same page.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Okay.
Page 10, there are no more amendments on page 10, Mr. President. I move to approve page 10.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Page 10A, Mr. President, the minority leader.
10A, we have a proposed amendment.
Lines,
Page 10A, delete lines 32 to 34A, starting with gross negligence, ending with the word representative on line 34A.
Mr. President, if I may, if the distinguished gentleman would agree, anterior, let's delete from lines 30, Mr. President. From lines 30 to your proposal.
Instead of line 30.
Instead of 32, let's delete the entire lines 30 and 31 as well. Yeah. Kasi may iwan yun eh.
Yeah, okay. Yes, we have no problems. We accept the amendment or amendment. We do deletion from line 30 to line 34A is the proposed amendment.
Yes, Mr. President.
You're deleting 30 to 34?
Because the previous
The previous
line in the preceding page
Yes.
was
All right.
deleted.
So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Wala na, 10A.
Huh?
Still 10A.
Page 10.
Hindi na, dinilit na eh.
Oh.
40 to 44 na.
Yes. On 10A, delete lines 40 to 44.
40 to 44.
Lines 44.
40 to 44. Okay.
Starting with any employer and ending with the word corrected.
Yes.
So delete this line, line 44, 40 to 44 on 10A.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
For this purpose, I may.
Any,
Okay. On this, sorry.
10A.
Still on 10A, lines
10A.
44B.
44B.
Insert the word reasonable before the word administrative, corresponding reasonable administrative fines.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
No more amendments on 10A. I move to approve 10A, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
We now move to page 11. Any amendments on page 11? No amendments on page 11 except the amendments proposed by Senator Villanueva. I move to approve page 11.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Page 12, Mr. President.
Amendment.
Thank you, Lord. Subject to style.
More amendments on page 12, Mr. President. I move to approve page 12.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion approved.
Mr. President, I wish I could ask that we approve this on second reading, but we might as well have a clean copy by tomorrow, Mr. President, so that we can approve it on second reading. And make sure that no other members of the Senate who are not here present be introducing any other amendments.
I understand, Mr. President, and just one last point, all amendments shall be done subject to style, Mr. President, so to give leeway to our Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, and therefore I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1317.
Is there any objection? There being
Yes,
none,
no.
motion approved.
A new copy be submitted. Oh, by the way, for the record, Mr. President, for those interested, there are 3 senators left in the hall discussing the occupational safety and health standards.
Four.
In the hall, but one presiding, Mr. President, Senator Recto. The 3 on the floor, for the record, Senator Drilon, the minority leader, was Secretary of Labor. That is why he is concerned. And then the sponsor is the chair of the TESDA, and that is why he is concerned, and chairman of the Committee on Labor. The majority leader, Mr. President, is the son of the first Philippine Medical Commissioner of the Department of Labor under the Workmen's Compensation Commission, Mr. President. That is why we are concerned also. Thank you, Mr. President.
And the presiding officer nakikisama lang sa inyong tatlo.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to designate the following members of the Senate on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 1662 and House Bill 6573. This is the anti-hazing law. For Senator Pampilo Lacson, Chairman, and members, Gatchalian, Zubiri, Villanueva, Hunasan, and Trillanes for the minority, Mr. President. So moved.
So designated.
Thank you, Mr. President. This has been cleared with the Senate President. I also move to designate the Senate contingent to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 1279 and House Bill 5269. This is on the Committee on Education. Senators Escudero as chair, Aquino, Grace Poe, and Ralph Recto, Mr. President, members.
So moved.
Mr. President, may we ask the Secretariat to make sure that the agenda tomorrow is not too long? Because I know that your wife is waiting for you in Lipa. So I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, Mr. President.
Session is adjourned ba? Adjourned.
Salamat, boss.
Okay.